The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Ambassador Zixthor stepped inside, his forearms shaking as he walked toward the center of the vast room. The chamber could hold 10,000 beings from across the galaxy, and today it was packed. Representatives from every known species sat in their assigned sections, their eyes fixed on the tall alien who had called this emergency session. Zixthor had been the Viridian Empire's top diplomat for over 50 years. He had negotiated trade deals worth trillions of credits. He had prevented 3 wars through careful words and smart planning. But today, his voice cracked as he spoke into the floating microphone that would carry his words to every corner of known space. "The humans are gone," he said, and the chamber fell silent. All of them. Every single human in the galaxy has vanished without a trace. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted. Delegates jumped to their feet, shouting questions in dozens of languages. Some species that had spent years trying to destroy human colonies now looked terrified. Others seemed confused as if they could not understand what Zixthor had just said. Council Chairman Veltarn, a massive creature with gray skin and 3 eyes, slammed his ceremonial hammer against the podium. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. "Order!" he roared, his voice enhanced by technology that made it boom from every speaker. "Let the ambassador speak." Zixthor's hands trembled as he activated the holographic display above his head. A 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, showing the territories of every major power. The sections that had been marked in blue for human space were now flashing red. 48 hours ago, our monitoring stations detected something unusual. Zixthor continued. All human communication stopped at exactly the same moment. No distress calls, no emergency signals, just silence. The hologram changed, showing Admiral Kate Johnson's face. She had been the commanding officer of the human fleet, a woman with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. Her expression in the recording was peaceful, almost like she was saying goodbye to old friends. This transmission was sent from the human capital ship 30 minutes before the silence began, Zixthor explained, and Kate Johnson's voice filled the chamber. "To the members of the Galactic Council," her recorded image said, "you have spent decades trying to remove humanity from the galaxy. You have attacked our colonies, stolen our technology, and killed our people. You wanted us gone. Congratulations, you got your wish." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The draconian representative, a lizard-like being with golden scales, hissed softly. The Altarian ambassador, whose people had been at war with humans just 5 years ago, stared at the hologram with wide eyes. "But remember this," Admiral Johnson continued. "You never defeated us. We were never conquered. We simply chose to leave. This is not surrender. This is goodbye." The recording ended and the hologram switched back to the galactic map. Zixthor pointed to the human territories with one of his long fingers. "Our scout ships have visited every human world. Every space station. Every mining facility. They found cities with food still warm on tables. Ships docked at stations with their engines still running. But no people. Not one human anywhere." General Voxtar, the Council's military commander, stood up. His species looked like walking trees, tall and brown with bark-like skin. "What about their defense systems?" he asked in a voice that sounded like wind through leaves. "All offline," Zixthor replied. "But here's the strange part. The systems didn't fail. They were shut down from the inside with proper authorization codes. Everything was done correctly, as if the humans were just going on vacation and wanted to secure their homes." The Centaurian delegate, a blue-skinned woman with silver hair, raised her hand. "Have we found any clues about where they went? Any evidence of ships leaving human space?" Zixthor shook his head. "Our sensors are among the best in the galaxy. They can detect a single fighter craft from 3 systems away. But in the past 48 hours, we have recorded 0 ships leaving human territory, no hyperspace signatures, no engine trails, nothing." Chairman Veltarn leaned forward in his massive chair. His 3 eyes focused on different parts of the chamber as he spoke. "Are you telling us that 60 billion humans just disappeared into thin air?" "That appears to be exactly what happened," Zixthor said. "But there's more." The hologram changed again, showing a message written in the common galactic language. The words appeared letter by letter, as if someone was typing them in real time. This message has been broadcasting on all human frequencies since the disappearance began, Zixthor explained. It repeats every hour on the hour, from every human communications array in the galaxy. The message was short and simple. Phase 1 complete. A chill ran through the chamber. Delegates who had been shouting questions now sat in stunned silence. Phase 1 implied that there would be a Phase 2, and possibly more phases after that. The draconian representative stood up, his tail lashing behind him. This could be a trick, he said, his voice like grinding metal. Humans are known for their deception. They could be hiding on their worlds waiting for us to lower our guard. We thought of that, Zixthor replied. We sent infiltration teams to 12 major human cities. They found empty buildings, empty streets, empty homes, but the power is still on. The computers are still running. The hydroponic gardens are still growing food. It's as if the entire human population just stepped outside for a moment and forgot to come back. Dr. Kolseth, the Zephyrian scientist who served as the Council's technology advisor, raised one of her tentacles. What about their research facilities? Their military bases? Surely they left some information behind. Zixthor's expression grew even more troubled. That's perhaps the most disturbing discovery. Every human database has been completely wiped. Every computer, every data storage device, every backup system, 40,000 years of human history, science, and culture. Gone. It's as if they took their entire civilization with them. The chamber erupted in worried conversations. Species that had fought humans for generations now realized they had lost access to human technology that they had been secretly using. Medical techniques that kept entire populations healthy. Engineering solutions that made their cities possible. Agricultural methods that fed billions of people across hundreds of worlds. The implications are staggering, Chairman Veltarn said, his voice heavy with concern. Human technology powers 60% of our energy grids. Human medicine keeps our children alive. Human food production feeds half the galaxy. Ambassador Zixthor nodded grimly. The economic analysis is still being completed, but preliminary reports suggest that without human contributions to galactic trade, at least 40 species will face immediate resource shortages. Some may not survive. The irony was not lost on anyone in the chamber. For decades, various council members had tried to limit human influence to reduce their power, to push them out of galactic affairs. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, and now they were beginning to understand the true cost of that victory. There's one more thing, Zixthor said, his voice barely above a whisper. The message broadcasting from human space. It's not just repeating the same words. It's counting down. Counting down to what? Chairman Veltarn asked. We don't know, Zixthor replied. But according to our translation teams, we have 71 days, 14 hours and 37 minutes until it reaches 0. 3 months had passed since the humans vanished and the galaxy was falling apart. Stock markets across known space had crashed within the first week. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for centuries now sat empty. Cargo ships floated dead in space, their human-designed engines silent and cold. On the industrial world of Kepler Prime, massive factories that had produced everything from starship parts to medical supplies stood motionless. The Altarian workers who had operated these facilities for decades stared helplessly at control panels covered in human writing. Without the human engineers who had designed these systems, no one knew how to restart the production lines. Dr. Lisa Martinez had been the chief researcher at the Terran Institute of Xenobiology before humanity disappeared. Her laboratory on New Earth remained exactly as she had left it, with coffee still sitting in her mug and research notes scattered across her desk. When council investigators finally gained access to the facility, they found something that made their blood run cold. The notes detailed something called the Exodus Protocol, a plan that had been in development for over 50 years. Dr. Martinez had written about secret meetings, hidden research facilities, and massive resource stockpiling operations that had somehow escaped council notice. Her final entry, dated just 2 days before the disappearance, contained a single chilling line. The preparations are complete. Tomorrow we begin the final phase. Meanwhile, the first pirate fleets had begun moving into former human territory. The Crimson Raiders, a notorious group of outlaws from the Outer Rim, saw the empty human worlds as easy targets. Their leader, Captain Vex Korath, had assembled the largest pirate armada in galactic history to claim the abandoned riches of human space. The raiders' first target was New Phoenix, a former human mining colony that had been one of the richest worlds in the galaxy. Intelligence reports suggested the colony's warehouses still contained billions of credits worth of rare minerals. Korath's fleet of 300 ships approached the planet with confidence, expecting to find defenseless storage facilities and abandoned equipment. Instead, they found hell waiting for them. The orbital defense platforms around New Phoenix came online the moment the pirate ships entered the system. Weapons that had been silent for months suddenly blazed to life, firing with deadly precision. But these weren't the standard defense systems that pirates had learned to expect. These platforms seemed to learn from each attack, adapting their targeting patterns and improving their accuracy with every shot. Within 6 hours, Korath's mighty armada was reduced to floating debris. Only 12 ships escaped, and their survivors brought back reports that terrified even the most hardened criminals. The defense systems had not just destroyed the pirate fleet, they had hunted down individual escape pods and disabled them without killing their occupants, as if sending a message that mercy was still possible, but resistance was futile. The news of the pirates' destruction spread quickly through Council space. General Voxtar ordered immediate investigations into all former human defensive installations. What his teams discovered defied explanation. The automated systems were operating at peak efficiency, despite having no human operators. More disturbing still, they seemed to be coordinating with each other across vast distances, sharing tactical information and updating their defensive strategies in real time. Council security forces attempted to access human computer systems, hoping to find some clue about where the humans had gone or how their technology continued to function. Every attempt ended in failure. The databases hadn't just been erased, they had been wiped so thoroughly that even the most advanced recovery techniques found nothing but empty storage space. Dr. Nina Brooks had been working on something called Project Gateway for over 30 years before the disappearance. Her research station in the asteroid belt had been one of humanity's most classified facilities, hidden from Council surveillance through clever use of sensor-blocking technology. When investigators finally located the station, they found equipment that none of them could identify. The station's main laboratory contained massive machines that hummed with energy, despite being abandoned for months. Strange geometric patterns covered the walls, equations written in human mathematics that made no sense to even the galaxy's most brilliant scientists. At the center of it all stood a circular platform surrounded by towers that sparked with electrical energy. Whatever Dr. Brooks had been building, it was still active and still consuming enormous amounts of power. The economic collapse was accelerating. On Centauri Prime, hospitals began running out of critical medicines that had been produced exclusively by human pharmaceutical companies. The Draconian Empire's agricultural worlds faced famine as their crop yields dropped without human-developed fertilizers and genetic enhancements. Even the wealthy core worlds found themselves struggling as their power grids, dependent on human fusion technology, began showing signs of instability. Ambassador Zixthor had aged years in just months. The stress of managing the crisis was visible in his posture and the way his forearms moved with less coordination than before. He spent his days fielding desperate requests for aid from council members who had once voted to limit human influence in galactic affairs. The irony was bitter. The same species who had wanted humans gone now begged for any scrap of human knowledge that might save their civilizations. The first attempted invasion of human space became a disaster that haunted military strategists for years afterward. A combined fleet from 12 different species, over 800 ships strong, entered former human territory with orders to secure valuable installations and technology. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Rex Parker, the only human who had remained in council space after defecting to the Altarian Navy decades earlier. Parker thought his knowledge of human tactics would give the invasion force an advantage. He was wrong. The fleet encountered something far worse than human defenders. They faced ghost ships that appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before return fire could be targeted. These mysterious vessels used human design patterns but moved in ways that seemed to defy physics. The ghost ships never destroyed their targets completely. Instead, they disabled engines, knocked out weapons systems, and left the council ships drifting helplessly in space. It was as if they wanted the survivors to return home and spread word of what they had encountered. The psychological effect was devastating. Rumors spread through military ranks that the humans had somehow transcended physical limitations and now existed as spirits of revenge. The invasion fleet limped back to Council space with over half their ships damaged and their crews traumatized. Admiral Parker's final report contained a recommendation that chilled military leaders across the galaxy. Under no circumstances should any force enter former human territory. We are not dealing with conventional enemies. We are facing something beyond our understanding. As the months passed, the countdown that had appeared on human communication arrays continued its relentless progress. 68 days, 14 hours and 12 minutes remained when the Council received their first direct communication from the vanished humans. It was brief, transmitted on emergency frequencies, and delivered by a voice that many recognized as belonging to Captain Jake Nelson, former commander of the human deep space exploration fleet. "You wanted to know where we went," Nelson's voice said through speakers across the galaxy. "You're about to find out. The countdown you've been watching isn't measuring time until our return. It's measuring time until you understand the true cost of the choice you made." The Council had authorized something that had never happened before in galactic history. Every intelligence agency from every member species was now working together, sharing classified information and pooling their resources to solve the mystery of humanity's disappearance. The urgency was clear. With 43 days left on the countdown, they needed answers before whatever the humans had planned came to pass. Commander Rex Parker stood in the center of the Council's new crisis command room, surrounded by screens showing data from across the galaxy. As the only human who had remained behind, he had become the most valuable person in known space. Intelligence officers from dozens of species hung on his every word, hoping his knowledge of human psychology might provide the key to understanding what had happened. Parker had joined the Altarian Navy 25 years ago after disagreeing with Earth's military policies. He thought he understood his former species better than anyone. Now, staring at the evidence spread before him, he realized how wrong he had been. The humans had been planning something far beyond his imagination, and they had kept it secret from everyone, including their own people. "Show me the Mars data again," Parker said to the Zephyrian technician operating the main display. The screen filled with images from the Red Planet, showing massive excavation sites that had been discovered only days earlier. The dig sites were old, some dating back over 30 years. But they had been hidden so well that even Council spy satellites had missed them. Dr. Nina Brooks had been in charge of the Mars project, according to recovered personnel files. Her research teams had been digging deep into the planet's core, following what appeared to be artificial structures buried miles beneath the surface. The excavation records showed they had found something significant just 6 months before the disappearance, but all details about the discovery had been classified at the highest levels. Parker studied the photographs of the dig sites with growing unease. The tunnels were massive, big enough to drive spacecraft through. Whatever the humans had found down there, it had required enormous resources to excavate. He calculated the amount of equipment and personnel needed for such an operation and felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't a small research project. It was a civilization-scale undertaking. "There's something else," said Dr. Colseth, the Zephyrian scientist who had been analyzing human research data. Her tentacles moved rapidly across her control panel as she brought up a new set of files. "We found personal logs from Captain Danny Wright, who was Parker's former colleague in the human fleet. The logs were hidden in a private data storage unit that Wright rented under a false name. The logs appeared on screen, showing Wright's face in a series of recordings made over several years. Parker recognized his old friend immediately. They had served together on 3 different ships before Parker's defection. Wright looked tired in the recordings, as if he was carrying a heavy burden. Personal log date 2387.415. Wright's recorded voice began. "The project is bigger than any of us imagined. What we found on Mars isn't just technology, it's a doorway. Command says we're not the first species to use it. They say others have gone through before us when their civilizations faced extinction." Parker felt his legs grow weak. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair as Wright's logs continued playing. The recordings detailed years of secret research into something called dimensional phase technology. According to Wright, Human scientists had discovered ancient alien machines buried on Mars that could open rifts between parallel universes. The tests have been successful, Wright continued in a later log. We can move small groups through the rifts safely. Dr. Brooks believes we can scale up the process to handle larger populations. Command has authorized Project Gateway, the complete evacuation of human civilization to a parallel reality where we can start fresh. The command room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't been destroyed or defeated. They had literally moved to another dimension, taking their entire civilization with them. It was a solution so radical, so impossible by normal standards, that no one had even considered it as a possibility. Dr. Colseth's research team had been working around the clock to understand the technology described in Wright's logs. Their preliminary analysis suggested that the dimensional rifts required enormous amounts of energy to create and maintain. The power requirements alone should have made such a project impossible, but somehow the humans had found a way to make it work. The search for more clues led Council forces to the Outer Rim territories, where long-range scouts had detected unusual energy signatures coming from abandoned human research stations. These facilities were located in empty space, far from any inhabited systems, and had been operating in complete secrecy for decades. The first station they investigated belonged to Dr. Nina Brooks herself. Her laboratory complex was enormous, built inside a hollowed-out asteroid that had been towed to a remote location. When Council teams finally breached the facility's defenses, they found equipment that defied their understanding of physics. The main laboratory contained what appeared to be a stable dimensional rift, held open by machines that continued to function, despite having no apparent power source. The rift itself was invisible to normal vision, but energy sensors detected a massive distortion in space-time at the center of the room. Standing near it, investigators reported feeling dizzy and disoriented, as if reality itself was bent out of shape. Around the rift, Brooks had left detailed notes about her experiments. Her handwriting was precise and scientific, but her words described things that sounded like magic. She wrote about sending probes through the rift and receiving data from parallel versions of Earth. She described contact with alternate versions of humanity that had made different choices and faced different challenges. Most disturbing of all, Brooks had documented successful tests with living subjects. Volunteers had passed through the rift and returned with reports of worlds where humans had never encountered other alien species, where Earth's civilization had developed along completely different paths. The parallel universes weren't empty. They were inhabited by versions of humanity that had evolved separately from the humans of this reality. The archaeological teams working on the Tau Ceti moon made an even more shocking discovery. The ancient ruins they had found weren't just old, they were impossibly old, predating any known civilization by millions of years. The technology buried in the ruins was clearly the source of the dimensional rift devices that humans had been using. Inside the deepest chamber of the ruins, carved into walls of unknown material, were genetic sequences that exactly matched human DNA. The implications were staggering. Either the ancient builders had somehow designed humanity, or humans were their descendants returning to claim their inheritance after eons of exile. Council scientists led by Dr. Colseth worked frantically to decode the alien writing found throughout the ruins. The symbols were complex and abstract, unlike any known language, but patterns began to emerge. The ancient builders had left behind what appeared to be instruction manuals, technical specifications for dimensional travel technology, and most importantly, warnings about its use. The warnings were clear once they were translated. The dimensional rift technology was powerful beyond imagination, but it came with a terrible price. Each use of the technology created permanent damage to the fabric of reality. Too much dimensional travel could cause entire universes to collapse into each other, destroying everything that existed in both realities. The humans had known about these risks according to the ancient texts. They had spent decades studying the warnings and developing safety protocols to minimize the danger. But they had also reached a conclusion that chilled the Council investigators to their cores. The damage caused by dimensional travel was acceptable compared to the alternative of remaining in a galaxy that wanted them destroyed. As the countdown reached 37 days, Council scientists made their most terrifying discovery yet. The ancient ruins contained star charts showing the locations of other dimensional rift sites scattered across the galaxy. Each site was marked with symbols indicating which species had used the technology to escape their home reality. Humanity wasn't the first civilization to choose exile over extinction. Dozens of species had made the same choice throughout galactic history, disappearing from reality rather than accepting defeat. The galaxy that the current civilizations called home was actually a graveyard of failed societies, a universe where only the survivors of countless dimensional exoduses remained to fight over the scraps left behind. The truth began to surface when Dr. Colseth's team finally cracked the encryption on the Council's oldest archives. Files that had been sealed for over 3 centuries suddenly became available, revealing documents that painted a very different picture of galactic history than what was taught in schools. The Terran-Viridian War, which history books described as a simple trade dispute, had actually been something far more sinister. Intelligence analyst Mary Foster had been documenting these crimes for decades before humanity vanished. Her personnel file was discovered in a Council black site facility that officially didn't exist. Foster had been a human intelligence officer working undercover within the Council's own security apparatus, gathering evidence of systematic discrimination and violence against human civilians. Foster's reports made for horrifying reading. They detailed planned attacks on human colonies disguised as pirate raids. They showed evidence of biological weapons testing on human prisoners. They revealed that several Council member species had been actively working to reduce human population growth through sabotage of medical supplies and food shipments. The Draconian Empire had been the worst offender. Their internal communications, decoded from Foster's intelligence files, showed a deliberate plan to eliminate humanity through what they called gradual extinction protocols. The plan involved making human space increasingly dangerous and unlivable, forcing humans to abandon colonies one by one until they were confined to just a few overcrowded worlds. The Viridian Empire had provided financial support for these operations, viewing humans as a threat to their dominant position in galactic trade. The Altarians had contributed military intelligence, helping plan attacks that would look like accidents or random violence. Even species that publicly supported human rights had been secretly undermining human settlements through bureaucratic sabotage and economic warfare. Admiral Peter Davis had seen this coming 40 years before it happened. His final report to the Terran Senate, discovered in the ruins of the Human Strategic Command Facility, had predicted exactly what would occur if the persecution continued. Davis had been one of humanity's most brilliant military minds, and his analysis of galactic politics had been terrifyingly accurate. The Council species will never accept humanity as equals, Davis had written. They view us as a threat to their established order, and they will continue to find ways to diminish our power until we are either enslaved or extinct. Traditional military responses will only provide temporary relief. We need a permanent solution that removes us from their sphere of influence entirely. Davis had recommended immediate research into what he called alternative settlement options. His report included detailed proposals for deep space colonization, generation ships, and more exotic possibilities that had seemed like science fiction at the time. One section, marked with the highest security classification, discussed dimensional relocation as a final defensive measure. The report had been dismissed by most human leaders as too extreme. The Terran Senate had voted to pursue diplomatic solutions instead, believing that reasonable negotiations could resolve the conflicts with other species. Only a small group of military and scientific personnel had taken Davis's warning seriously, and they had begun preparing for the worst-case scenario in secret. While the Council investigators struggled with these revelations about their own past crimes, the first phase of human retaliation began across the galaxy. Automated systems that had remained dormant since the disappearance suddenly activated, but these weren't the defensive weapons that had destroyed pirate fleets. These were precision instruments designed for a very different kind of warfare. The attacks began with the personal assets of Council members who had voted for anti-human legislation over the years. Chairman Veltarn was the first target. His private estate on Centauri Prime, a massive complex worth billions of credits, was rendered completely uninhabitable in a matter of hours. The automated systems didn't destroy the buildings or harm any living beings. They simply made it impossible for anyone to remain there. The estate's water supply was contaminated with harmless but foul-smelling chemicals. The air circulation system began producing a high-pitched whine that made concentration impossible. The gravity generators fluctuated randomly, making it dangerous to walk from room to room. Every electronic device in the complex began malfunctioning in precisely coordinated ways. Veltarn's bank accounts were the next target. Funds were systematically transferred to charity organizations across the galaxy, with particular emphasis on groups that provided aid to refugees and displaced populations. The transactions were completely legal according to galactic banking law, but they had been authorized using Veltarn's own biometric data in ways that should have been impossible. Similar attacks occurred simultaneously across Council space. General Voxtar's military pension was donated to veteran support groups. Ambassador Zixthor's investment portfolio was liquidated, and the proceeds were sent to medical research foundations. The draconian ambassador's family compound was subjected to a plague of harmless but persistent insects that made the buildings unusable. The precision and coordination of these attacks was terrifying. Somehow, the vanished humans had been planning this retaliation for years, gathering detailed intelligence on every council member who had worked against human interests. They knew bank account numbers, security codes, personal schedules, and family locations. The message was clear. If they could reach personal assets, they could reach anything. Dr. Amy Carter's research notes provided the final piece of the puzzle. Carter had been a human xenobiologist who specialized in studying alien political systems and social structures. Her work had been publicly available and seemed harmless, just an academic's analysis of how different species organized their governments and made decisions. The reality was far more sophisticated. Carter had been developing predictive models of galactic political trends with stunning accuracy. Her research had allowed humanity to forecast major policy changes years before they occurred. More importantly, she had identified which species and individuals would pose the greatest threats to human survival in the long term. Carter's final research project had been a comprehensive analysis of council decision-making patterns. Her conclusions were devastating. She had proven mathematically that the council's political structure made peaceful coexistence with humanity impossible. The system was designed to favor older, established species while systematically excluding newer civilizations like humanity from meaningful participation. The xenobiologist had also discovered something that explained humanity's genetic compatibility with the ancient dimensional technology. Her research into alien evolution patterns had revealed that humans weren't native to this reality at all. The human species had originally evolved in a parallel universe and had been transported to this reality thousands of years ago by an earlier use of the dimensional rift technology. Humanity had always been refugees, descended from survivors of some ancient catastrophe that had forced their ancestors to flee their original home. The genetic markers that allowed them to operate the dimensional technology weren't a coincidence. They were inheritance from ancestors who had used the same technology to escape a previous extinction. This discovery explained why humans had always seemed slightly different from other galactic species. Their rapid technological development, their unusual social adaptability, their fierce independence. These weren't random evolutionary traits. They were survival characteristics, developed by a species that had already faced total extinction once before and had evolved specifically to recognize and respond to existential threats. The Council archives revealed that some member species had suspected this truth for decades. The systematic persecution of humanity hadn't been random xenophobia. It had been a calculated attempt to prevent humans from reclaiming their full potential. The other species had feared that if humans ever discovered their true origins, they would become unstoppable. As the countdown reached 28 days, the Council faced a terrible realization. They weren't just dealing with an angry enemy who had chosen to leave. They were facing the descendants of the original builders of the dimensional technology, a species that had spent thousands of years learning how to survive in hostile environments. Humanity had been preparing for this moment not just for decades, but for their entire evolutionary history. The vanished humans had played a game that operated on timescales the Council couldn't comprehend. While other species planned in terms of years or decades, humanity had been implementing strategies that spanned centuries. They had allowed themselves to be persecuted and attacked because they knew that every injustice would justify their eventual departure and provide moral justification for what they were planning to do next. The final transmission arrived when the countdown reached exactly 72 hours. Every communication device in Council space received the signal simultaneously, from military command centers to personal communication units carried by ordinary citizens. The message came through on frequencies that should have required massive broadcasting arrays, yet the source was impossible to trace. Captain Jake Nelson's face appeared on screens across the galaxy. He looked older than when he had commanded human deep space missions, but his eyes held a calmness that was somehow more frightening than anger. Behind him, glimpses of vast structures could be seen through what appeared to be a window, cities floating in space between dimensions, home to the billions of humans who had chosen exile over submission. "People of the Galactic Council," Nelson began, his voice carrying clearly despite the impossible distance between realities. "You have spent the last few months learning what your actions have cost you. The economic collapse, the technological failures, the loss of everything humans contributed to your civilization. But this was only the beginning. The Council's emergency session had been called the moment the transmission began. Representatives from every species sat in stunned silence as Nelson continued speaking. Chairman Veltarn, whose personal wealth had been systematically donated to charity over the past weeks, gripped his ceremonial hammer with 3 hands while his third eye focused on the massive display screen. "You have 72 hours to make a choice," Nelson said. "Dismantle your military fleets completely. Dissolve the Galactic Council as a governing body. Return to your home systems and remain there. Do this and you will never see us again. We will close the dimensional barriers permanently and leave you to build whatever civilization you can manage without us." General Voxtar stood up slowly, his tree-like form creaking with the movement. "And if we refuse?" he asked, knowing that somehow the transmission was interactive despite being sent from another dimension. Nelson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the space behind him. The floating cities became more visible and they were larger than anyone had imagined. Millions of structures stretched into the distance, some the size of small moons, all connected by streams of energy that pulsed with power beyond measurement. "If you refuse," Nelson replied, "you will discover what humans can accomplish when we are no longer bound by your laws, your treaties, or your concepts of what is possible. We have had months to prepare in a reality where time moves differently than yours. We have built things that would take you centuries to understand." The transmission paused, and for a moment the council chamber was filled only with the sound of nervous breathing from a dozen different species. Then Nelson spoke again, and his words sent chills through every listener. "The automated systems we left behind were not our weapons. They were our restraints. They were programmed to limit the damage we could cause, to ensure that our departure would be painful but not fatal for your civilizations. If you force us to return, we will not be so careful about collateral damage." Dr. Colseth's tentacles moved frantically across her console as she tried to analyze the transmission. The energy readings were impossible. The signal was being broadcast from a location that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Somehow the humans had not just moved to another reality, they had learned to exist in several realities at once. "We know about your crimes," Nelson continued. "Mary Foster's reports, the biological weapons, the planned attacks on civilian populations, the centuries of systematic persecution disguised as political disagreement. We have documented everything, and we have shared this information with the authorities in 17 parallel realities." The implications of that statement hit the Council like a physical blow. If humans in other dimensions had learned about the Council's actions, it meant that humanity now had allies across multiple realities. The isolated persecution that had seemed manageable in one universe had become a multi-dimensional incident with consequences that could ripple across infinite parallel worlds. "Your choice is simple," Nelson said. "Accept exile to your home systems and live whatever lives you can build there, or face the combined attention of humanity across all realities. We have found versions of ourselves that never encountered your species, that developed without the constraints of your interference. They are very interested in meeting you." The transmission ended, leaving the Council in chaos. Delegates shouted questions that had no answers. Military advisors tried to explain defensive strategies against enemies that existed in other dimensions. Economic ministers calculated the cost of dismantling civilization and found the numbers too large to comprehend. Chairman Veltarn called for order, but his voice lacked its usual authority. The past months had aged him visibly, and the revelation that humans had been documenting council crimes for generations had destroyed his confidence in the system he had helped build. "We need to vote," he said finally. "Compliance or resistance. The decision must be made by the full council." The debate that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Species that had worked together for centuries found themselves split by fear and pride. The draconian representative argued for military resistance, claiming that humanity was bluffing about their capabilities. The Centaurian delegate supported immediate compliance, pointing out that they had nothing left to lose since the human departure had already destroyed their economy. Ambassador Zixthor, whose own assets had been systematically redistributed by human automated systems, found himself in the strange position of defending the species that had humiliated him. "They could have killed us all by now," he pointed out. "The precision of their retaliation shows they still have some restraint. If we push them further, we might lose even that." The Altarian representative, whose people had suffered massive casualties in the failed invasion of human space, abstained from the debate entirely. Their military had been broken by encounters with human ghost ships that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. The idea of facing enemies with even greater capabilities was too terrifying to contemplate. As the hours passed, reports began coming in from across the galaxy. The automated systems that humans had left behind were activating in new ways. Not destructive yet, but demonstrative. Power grids flickered in patterns that spelled out messages in various alien languages. Transportation networks rerouted traffic to form geometric shapes visible from orbit. The message was clear. If humans could control these systems from another dimension, they could do much worse things if provoked. The final vote was closer than anyone expected. 47 species voted for compliance. 43 voted for resistance. 3 abstained, including the Altarians, whose abstention effectively decided the matter in favor of surrender. The dismantling began immediately. Military fleets across the galaxy received orders to power down their weapons and return to home ports. The Great Council fleet, which had maintained peace through superior firepower for over 2 millennia, began the process of decommissioning ships that had once been the most advanced in known space. The dissolution of the Council itself took longer. Treaties had to be cancelled, trade agreements had to be terminated, and the massive bureaucracy that had governed hundreds of species had to be carefully shut down to avoid complete chaos. Some worlds descended into civil war, as local governments collapsed without council oversight. Others flourished for the first time in centuries as they were freed from restrictive regulations. 3 months after humanity's final ultimatum, the last council ship powered down its weapons. The great civilization that had ruled the galaxy for millennia officially ceased to exist. In its place remained only isolated species, confined to their home systems and struggling to rebuild societies that had become dependent on human technology and council authority. On the final day, as the last government facilities on Centauri Prime went dark, a brief dimensional rift opened near the abandoned council chambers. Through it, observers caught a glimpse of the civilization that humanity had built in exile, cities that spanned dimensions, ships that moved between realities as easily as crossing a room, children playing in parks that existed in multiple universes simultaneously. The rift closed after only moments, but it left behind a small memorial plaque that appeared on the wall of the empty council chamber. The inscription was simple, written in the common galactic language. Here stood those who forgot that freedom, once tasted, can never be truly taken away. The galaxy entered a new age. Without the Council's authority or human technology, most species faced a difficult future of isolation and gradual decline. Some adapted and built new societies. Others faded into irrelevance. A few managed to maintain small interstellar civilizations within their home systems, and somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, humanity continued to grow, explore, and thrive. They had not conquered their enemies through superior firepower. They had not negotiated a favorable peace through clever diplomacy. Instead, they had chosen a solution that was uniquely human. They had simply walked away from a game they couldn't win and created their own rules in a place where their former oppressors couldn't follow. The greatest victory in human history had been achieved not through war, but